In this video, I'm going to show you how to complete the Hello World Challenge for the iOS Dev course. So the first thing that I want to do is create a GitHub repository for the work that I'm going to do. So I'm going to GitHub. I'm already logged in, so I'm going to go to my profile, and here it lists my repositories. And what I want to do is create a new repository for Hello World. So I click New, and I give it a repository name. I'm going to say Hello World. And then I'm going to give it a description, the Hello World Challenge for iOS App Dev. And for this particular challenge, this repository is going to be public. So I have public selected. I'm going to initialize it with a README, and then I'm going to add a Git Ignore. And in the list of Git Ignore options, there is one for Swift. So I'll select it. And I am not going to have a license for this. So I'm going to say create repository. Now this repository has this README that was created, and we're not going to be dealing with markdown files in this assignment, in this challenge, but we will be in the future. We can ignore that for now. And then here's the Git Ignore file, and the Git Ignore specifies all of the files or directories that Git is going to ignore. There is one that we want to add that is not in the Swift version of the Git Ignore. So I'm going to click Edit this file. And then under the other category, I'm going to add .ds_store, where the DS and the S in store are capitalized. DS store files are on the Mac. They're dot files, so they're hidden from the kind of normal directory display within the Finder. But we don't want to track .ds store files. They're different for each user. They change a lot. They don't really add anything to our project. So we don't want Git to manage them. So once I added .ds_store, I need to commit this, and I'm going to commit it to the master branch. So I'm going to say here added .ds_store to .gitignore. And I'm going to commit the changes. So now we have our .ds_store within our Git Ignore. And notice that the Hello World has a dash in it. We can't have spaces in the names. You can enter a space when you create the repository, but it's going to put a dash in there if there is a space. So this is our repository, and it has this README markdown file and this .gitignore in it. This serves as the basis for our repository that we're going to have on our Mac, which will be connected to the GitHub repository. So I'm going to go to the green button here that says clone or download, and I'm going to click the copy to clipboard button, and I have this HTTPS URL, which is what we need to clone this repository. So where I intend to put my projects is in Documents Projects. I don't have any there right now. So I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to change directory to Documents Projects. And if I do an ls-al, we see that we have nothing there except our friend the .ds_store file. And what I want to do is have a directory for my Xcode project that is managed by Git and connected to the Git repository Hello World on GitHub. So the way that I do this is I type Git, and it alludes to this here. It says clone with HTTPS. So what I want to do is clone. So I'm going to say git clone, and then I'm going to paste the URL. Hit enter, and it is cloning it. Now, if this is the first time that you're using GitHub, and you supply a URL to a repository in your account, it's going to ask you for your credentials. Once the credentials are obtained in the future, it will probably not ask you for those credentials again. So it didn't ask me because I previously used Git to clone from a Tech Innovator, which is the account that I'm using, repository on GitHub. So if you are asked for user ID and password, supply your GitHub user ID and password. Now that I've cloned this, if I do an ls-al, you'll see that I have a directory hello-world. So I'm going to change to the directory hello-world and do an ls-al. And we see here the .git ignore file, which was available in the repository, and the readme.md file, the markdown file, which is available in the repository. And there's also a .git directory, which contains all of the stuff for managing this Git repository. So this is my starting point for Hello World. We haven't touched Xcode yet, but this is where the Xcode project is going to go. So I'm going to now launch Xcode, create a new Xcode project. I can do that either from this pop-up window, if you do get this window, or if not, you can go to File, New Project. And what we want is an iOS single view application project. So I'm going to say that those are my selections, click Next. The name of our product is going to be Hello World. And notice these things are filled in because I've used Xcode before with this user account. You may need to add these things in when you start. So the organization name for the purpose of this class would be, say, your name. And then the organizational identifier is a reverse domain name. I own the website techinnovator.online, so the reverse domain name is online.techinnovator. The organizational identifier, along with the product name, form the bundle identifier, and if the product name has a space in it, it'll be replaced with a dash. This bundle identifier in the universe of all apps needs to be unique. So the reason we use a domain name along with the product name is because if we own the domain name, then we're only using our product names with our domain names, and that should give us unique bundle identifiers. You can make up something, or you can use an existing domain you have, or if you're looking for an organizational identifier, edu.missouri would be fine to use. We're going to then enter the language we want to use, which is going to be Swift for this course, and we want to design and develop our applications to be used universally on iPads and iPhones, so we're going to select universal. These checkboxes presently don't really matter. I'm going to leave them checked. We'll deal with those as we work with future projects. So I'm going to click Next, and then it's going to say, well, where do you want to put this? So I'm going to go to Projects, and I'm going to select Hello World, and then I'm going to say Create. Now notice it says here, source control, create Git repository on my Mac. And it also says below it, the folder Hello World contains a Git repository. We don't need to create a Git repository because we in fact already have one. It's the one that we cloned from GitHub. And the process that I'm showing I believe to be the easiest one to do, rather than creating an Xcode project and creating a Git repository and then figuring out how to get that on GitHub, it's easier to create the repository on GitHub, clone it, and then create your Xcode project within it. So we're inside Hello World, which contains a Git repository, and that's where we're going to create our Xcode project. So I'm going to say Create, and here we are, and we have an Xcode project. And you'll see these letters here along beside the files and folders or files and groups that are in my Xcode project. And these letters indicate status within our Git repository. And A stands for added, M stands for modified. So if I were to do nothing new here, a bunch of stuff got created here, and I go up to source control, I could say commit, and I could say a commit message. This is what I'm going to commit into Git, and notice all these boxes are checked, and we have these letters indicating these things are going to be managed by Git. So my commit message is first commit of project. And it's going to commit 14 files. If I also check this push to remote, not only will it commit it, but it will push it to the remote server to GitHub, so it is there. So I'm going to do that, push to remote, and then I'm going to commit 14 files and push. So here we are committing the project. And it takes whatever time it has to take for it to be pushed to the server after the commit happens locally. And when it's done, it'll notify us of that. So this is the first time it looks like I'm using Xcode with this GitHub account. So I need to enter the username and password to authenticate. So I'm going to say Tech Innovator, which is the name of this account, and my password. Say OK. And now it's doing the push, and everything is done. So if I go back to GitHub and I click here on Hello World, we'll see we have our README and our Git Ignore, but we now also have a Hello World folder, and inside of it is our Xcode project, and then inside of that are our files that make up the project. So GitHub now has a copy of the Xcode project and its associated files, and we can now begin working on developing our application for the challenge. A few things before we begin dealing with how you manage the user interface in Xcode. In the top right, we have icons that let us show and hide parts of the user interface. And if you're looking for something and it's missing, you're probably looking for one of these icons to display the components. This right side also has a set of icons to move between things that it's, this left side is showing things that can be displayed in this sidebar. That first icon is the project navigator, and it shows us the elements of the project. This right side is information that will be displayed about things that we often will select here in the middle, and then the middle displays the currently selected thing over here. So this is project information. This folder is really a group, and it holds a set of files. This shows where it is actually located on the drive. And then inside of it, we have the individual pieces that we're going to work with that are part of the project. So the appdelegate.swift file is a file that is code that's part of the application. We're not going to be looking at the app delegate in this example, but it's needed to be there. Then we have a view controller. We are going to work with this view controller, and it is code associated with a thing called a view controller that's on the storyboard. Here is our storyboard, and this is a visual display of our view controller. This is a user interface for an iOS app. This is an assets entity that it lets us put icons in the app and other images in the app. We're not going to be messing with that today. This is a storyboard for what the user sees when the app is launched. It's the launch screen storyboard. We're not going to do anything with that. We're going to be only working with the main storyboard in this example. Info plist is a property list. These are properties for the application. And then this is used for core data. This is our data model. And then these are tests, and this is what gets built. So let's start with what we need to build in terms of the UI for the Hello World application. So we're going to go to main storyboard, and this is our view controller, and this little arrow says that this is the view controller that is going to be displayed when the application first launches. So this is the starting point. This is where we want to build our user interface. So with the right panel open, it's not, you can open it over here, and with the library icon, the object library icon selected, we want to find a label. So we take the label and we drag it, and as you move it around, you'll see, well, there's a blue line that appears, and there's a blue line. What I want to do is just drag the label in so that I have this vertical blue line, which says that I'm going to drop it at a location where it is horizontally centered, and it's some distance kind of down from the bottom. So that label is placed in the view controller, but it is not constrained yet, so that when we run the application, it's going to appear where we want it to be. And the way that we constrain items within the user interface is using something called auto layout constraints. So I'm going to just demonstrate in this example how to set the auto layout constraints. According to the challenge, we want the label 20 points down from the top layout guide and centered horizontally. So what we're going to do is select the label, hold the control key down on the keyboard, and then control click drag diagonally. And you'll notice the word top layout guide appeared there. That is what is referred to in the user interface as the top layout guide. It is an area where things appear at the top of a user interface. We don't have a lot of things up there right now. When we do navigation, we'd have a navigation bar. We do have the status bar at the top, but there's a room at the top for top items, and then there's room at the bottom for bottom items. That's called the, if I can get the bottom layout guide. So we're going to control click drag again diagonally, leave up, and this gives us a pop-up menu that lets us specify the constraints on this label. So we're going to make two choices here: vertical spacing to top layout guide and center horizontally in container. So to make two choices, I have to hold the shift key down to make the first one. So I'm holding shift and I'm clicking vertical space to top layout guide. And now I can leave off the shift key and choose center horizontally in container. I want to add these two constraints, so I'm going to click add constraints. And we'll now see that the label has this kind of solid blue line here and a little blue line there, indicating those constraints have been set. The constraints are also displayed here. The center of the label in the X position is going to be the center of the X position. So in other words, it's saying this label is centered within the view because the center X of the label is the center X of the view that it's in. And also the top of the label is set to the top layout guide bottom plus 27. And this blue line here, if we select it, can be double clicked, and we'll see that there's a 27 there. So we're 27 down from the top layout guide. Our target, based on the challenge, is for this to be 20 points down from the top layout guide. So I'm going to select that field, enter 20, and hit enter, and that will readjust this to 20. When I click outside, this label is now 20 down from the top layout guide and centered horizontally. We can also select the label and go to the ruler, and we'll see here align center X to super view means set it up so it's horizontally centered, and top space to top layout guide equals 20, which means that distance we set is 20. We could change the number here as well. This 20 could be changed here, say, to 10. That would move it up. I could change it back to 20, and that would move it down. So we have the label, and it is positioned where we want it. And we are told that the initial content of the label is to be welcome, exclamation point. We can double click on the label, and we can enter that text. Or we can select the label and go here to this icon that when we hover over it says Attributes Inspector, and we can see that whatever we enter in this second text field is also going to be displayed in the label. And if the label's height and width are not specifically constrained or set, then labels are set up so that they become the width of their content. So this label is becoming the width of welcome exclamation point, and in the future it will become the height and width of whatever is placed in it. So that's our label. Next we need a button. So we're going back to our object library and searching for button, dragging the button out below welcome. I'm going to put it so that I get that dotted blue line again to indicate that I've placed it horizontally centered. That doesn't mean it is centered, it just means it's in the right place as I'm centering it. I won't be offset from that. So I'm going to drop the button. This button is to say hello, so I'm going to double click in it and put the word hello in. This button needs to be put 10 points below the label and centered horizontally. So control click drag from the button to the welcome. So I'm holding the control key down, I clicked in the hello button and I dragged to the welcome label. Leave up. And I'm going to set two constraints again. So I'm going to hold the shift key down. I'm going to select vertical spacing. I can leave off the shift at that point, select center horizontally, and then say add constraints. And we see new constraints have been added to the constraints list. If I select the button and go to the ruler and scroll down, we can see it's centered horizontally and it's some distance below the welcome. It happens to be 17 points below the welcome, and we need it to be 10. So I could double click on this blue line, or I could click edit here, and I'm going to change it to 10. Finally, I need another button that's going to contain the word clear as its title. Placed below the hello, I drag the button till I get the dotted blue line. I then select it and control click drag up to the hello. And I do vertical spacing and center horizontally. And in order to make those two selections, I held the shift key down for the first selection. And then I say add constraints. I'm going to double click in the button and put the word clear in there. And with the button selected, I'm going to the ruler, scroll down, and it says top space to hello is only 1. I'm going to click edit, and I'm going to change it to 10. So I now have the constraints on my user interface. I have my label, I have my two buttons, hello and clear, and they are positioned where I need them to be. So the next step is that I need to write the code so that when I tap hello, it displays hello world, and when I tap clear, it clears out the label. So to do this, I'm going to first select my view controller. So I select it so it's outlined in blue, and I go to the icon that says Identity Inspector. And we'll see that it says Custom Class, and then the class says View Controller. This is referring to this file, View Controller. And when we built this iOS application in Xcode, it by default gave us a view controller in the storyboard, and it also gave us a view controller Swift code file to go along with it. This view controller is a subclass of the UI view controller class, and this entity, which is visually shown here, this view controller, is of type UI view controller. If we wanted to do specific things for us, then we need to subclass it. And so we're subclassing the UI view controller as a view controller. So in my storyboard, when I select this view controller and I go to the Identity Inspector, to the custom class, it's going to initially say within it, if I click outside of it here and back in, that it is in gray here a UI view controller, but I want it to be this custom class, a subclass view controller. So I begin typing it. It knows that view controller is the only one that is a subclass of UI view controller, and it fills it in. I hit enter, and now in Interface Builder, this view controller is associated with this view controller code file. So our next step is to connect the objects that we placed here in Interface Builder with the code in the view controller file. And the way we're going to do this is go to the Identity Inspector, the Assistant Editor. So we're going to go to the 2-circle icon and select it, and we may need to make some more room to see everything or shrink some things. What I ultimately want to see is this view controller file and also the view controller code file. And of course I could double click at the top. That would make my window bigger. That would give me more room. If you're on a laptop, you may not have a lot of room, so let's say we want to get rid of this right here. This little icon will make that appear and disappear. Or if we wanted to get rid of the files on the left side of the display, we could do that. If we wanted to get rid of the files on the right side, or the property inspector on the right side, we could do that. So as long as we can see what we have here in Interface Builder and we can see the code file, we're good to go. You'll notice that when we selected the Assistant Editor, here at the top it said Automatic. And there's also a manual mode where I can go find specific files to be displayed in the second window. If I select a view controller and then go into the Assistant Editor, and this is in automatic mode, it should automatically display the associated view controller file. If it isn't in automatic mode, you may need to go to automatic mode, or if it's not displaying the file you're expecting it to, you may need to manually go select it. But for a view controller, if you select it and this is automatic, it should display the view controller here. So we need to connect the label to a variable in the view controller so that we can communicate with that label object. And we do that by creating an Iboutlet. To create the Iboutlet, we're going to select the label. We're going to hold the control key down, and then with our mouse over the content of the label, we're going to control click drag, that is, hold the control key down and click drag with the mouse into the view controller. So we're going to be inside the class. If we go outside, it doesn't give us a line. If we go in between the functions, it'll give us a line. But where we really want this is right inside the top of the class for the view controller. And it says there, insert outlet or outlet collection, which is what we want. So I'm now going to leave up with the mouse, leave my finger off the control key, and I do in fact want to create an outlet. So outlet is selected, and I need to give a name to this outlet. And so I'm going to give it a real simple name here. We're going to call it the info label. And variables in Swift, like many OO languages, should begin with a lowercase letter. So info, lowercase I, and they should otherwise be camel case. So label here, which is kind of like a second word in the variable, should be uppercased. Uppercase starting letters are reserved for class names and new type names. They shouldn't be used for variables. So we're creating an outlet called info label that's of type UI label, and we're going to say connect. And now in my code, I can use the info label variable to communicate with this label. And by communicate with it, I mean I can tell it to display a different string, or tell it to clear out the contents of the label. The other parts of what get displayed here we're going to be talking about later. This is called creating an Iboutlet. We are creating a variable. The variable is going to reference a UI label. And then the other words, weak, which we'll talk about later, deals with reference counting. How is the memory managed for this? And this exclamation point deals with something called optionals, which we'll talk about later. And this is a auto unwrapped optional. And for now, none of this really matters to you. What you care about right now is that this is an outlet called info label to this label in the interface. Now, with regard to the buttons, I'm not going to need to change those buttons or ask the buttons anything. I do want to, though, be notified when the buttons are tapped by the user. And to do that, I need an IB action. So I'm going to select the hello button, hold the control key down, and control click drag inside the class below the other functions. So not outside that curly brace, inside the curly brace for the class. And it's going to say, it says there, insert outlet action or outlet collection. It's good. So I'm going to leave up on my mouse, leave go of the control key. I don't want an outlet this time, I want an action. This is a function that's going to get called when hello is tapped. And so I'm going to say, for the name of this action, hello pressed, or hello tapped, or I could say hello selected. Anything that is a good description of an action on this button. So I'm going to leave it hello selected. This action is going to call a function called hello selected when a touch up inside on that button. Touch up inside means the user put their finger on it and then lifted their finger while it was still on the button. The event could be changed to other events, but this is the one we want for a tap. And this type is currently set to any. We're going to set it to UI button, where actually it doesn't really matter because we're not going to reference it yet. But we can. This will specify the kind of object that is sending the message when the function is written. So I'm going to say connect, and we can see this. Hello selected is our function. The sender, the thing that generated a call to this function, is a UI button. The sender is that particular UI button. This is an IB action, so it is connected to Interface Builder, IB Interface Builder, as an action that's going to occur when this button is tapped. And then inside here we can write the code we want to have executed when that action occurs. So we're also going to need an IB action for clear. So I'm going to select clear, Control click drag here. Again, change the outlet to an action, and then we're going to call this clear selected, and we're going to have this occur on a touch up inside. It's a UI button that's generating the event. Say connect, and what we have now is a function that's going to get called when clear is selected. So I'm not done writing my code yet, but I feel like I should use my Git and GitHub ability to save the state of what it is that I'm working on. And you'll notice we have M's here right now. This indicates that our view controller has been modified, our storyboard is modified, and this assets file, XCAssets, has been modified. So if I go up to source control, I can commit my changes. And again, I have checkboxes here to show the things that have changed. And I'm going to commit the changes that have occurred with a message to indicate what I've done. So I've built UI and created IB actions and IB outlet. And I can push this to master, that is, push this to GitHub to be on the repository there, but I'm not going to do that this time. To illustrate, I'm going to do it as a separate action. So all of this is just going to be to commit the change. And so the committing is happening. And once it's been committed, I'll be back to being able to edit, but I won't have actually pushed this to GitHub. So if I want this on GitHub, then I need to do a separate push. So we'll wait for this to finish committing. And it's been committed. So now if I go up to source control, if I want to actually put this on GitHub, I'm going to need to push. Now before I do that, I'm going to come back here to GitHub. I'm going to go into Hello World, into the Hello World folder inside of it, and into View Controller. And you'll see that right now on GitHub, my View Controller has this view did load and did receive memory warning, but it does not have my IB outlets or my IB actions. So now I'm going to go in Xcode up to source control and say push. And I'm going to push it to my master branch. That's the only branch that I have right now. And the changes are being pushed. Push was successful. Now if I come back here and I go back into View Controller, we'll see that the code that I wrote here in Xcode is now on GitHub. So committing it simply notifies the local repository that we want to snapshot, this current state of the code. We want to remember the way it looks at this point in time. It's a point in time we could go back to if we need to undo something we did. But separately, then, if we want what has been created here up on GitHub, then we need to push it. So now our local Git repository and our GitHub repository contain the same code. So now going back to completing my application, when hello selected gets called, I want to take what's in the label, info label, and I want to change the contents of it to display hello world. So if I type info label dot, I get all the things that info label can do and properties that it has. And if I go down to T, the info label has a property on it called text, and that property can be set. If I go here to the to the question mark, this is my help inspector, I can see the text has get and set abilities. It is the text that is displayed in the label, so I can use it to change the text in the label. So infolabel.text is going to be set to hello world, exclamation point. And then down here, infolabel.text could be set to quote quote as a way to empty out the string. So the clearing action would be for me to set the text to nothing. I could also say infolabel dot, if there's any other options, checking to see if there was a clear option. There isn't, so I'm going to just leave it as infolabel.text equals quote quote. So we have a view controller. Its starting point, because of this error right here, for this app is that view controller. It has our user interface. The view controller has an associated code file. In it, we've created Iboutlet to the things that need to be modified, in this case, our label. And we've created IBActions for our buttons so that when they are tapped, they will do things. And the hello button, when tapped, will display hello world in the label. And when the clear button is selected, tapped, it will display nothing in the label. So I would like to test my application. So I go up to this icon that kind of looks like a play icon, and whatever simulator I have selected will be launched, which is what it's doing right now. And assuming the application compiled okay and there aren't any errors that are going to cause it to crash, it will display our application in the simulator, which is an iPhone 7 Plus. My welcome in the label is displayed. I click hello, displays hello world. I click clear, it gets rid of it. I click hello again, and it displays hello world. The simulator size can be changed by going to scale from the simulator window menu. So I could make it a little smaller by doing this, or I could make it very big by doing this, in which case it doesn't fit on my display. I can scroll to get to the parts. I'm going to scale it back again. I can also rotate my user interface. So it's rotating my iPhone 7 Plus, and this continues to work in display because our auto layout constraints don't really care whether I'm vertical or horizontal. I told it how far down, how far over, centered, etc. things are to be, and it's going to follow that set of rules. I'm going to rotate back left again, and then if I go up here and hit stop, it'll stop the simulator. And you can see the simulator here is just, in fact, an iPhone that you can use here on the desktop. It is better to not hit quit on the simulator. It's better to hit stop, because if I say run again, it will take less time to launch the simulation of the application if you hit stop and then you hit start again, because it just builds it and moves it to the phone. If you literally quit the simulator, then it's got to relaunch the simulator after it's been quit. So we have our working application. It looks to meet the requirements of the challenge. Notice the M here on View Controller. That indicates to us that this has been modified. The code that I wrote here for what happens when the buttons are tapped is not available on GitHub. So if I go back to View Controller, you'll see that code isn't here. For this challenge and the other challenges in the course, you're going to be supplying your GitHub repository for the challenge you're working on. And so it needs to contain all of the code, needs to contain the final project, and that is not here yet. So what steps do we need to do? Well, in Xcode, we're going to go to source control, and we need to first commit. And we can even see when we click here on this file that's been modified that previously it didn't have code inside the two functions, and now it does. This is what's going to get committed. So I can say here in my commit message, added functionality to IB actions on buttons in UI. Now, if I want to commit and push this to the master branch in GitHub, I can check this. Or I could do the commit and then I could separately go up to source control and push. So we're going to do both simultaneously. We're going to commit with this message and then we're going to push the changes up to GitHub. So I'm going to say commit one file and push. It's currently going through committing, and then after it's done committing, it will push the changes to the server. So now if I go to the view controller on GitHub, we see that indeed all of the code is there. And it is now time to submit my project on Canvas. And the way I would do this is if I go to the repository, what I really want is this URL. With this URL, I'm going to, as the instructor, be able to retrieve this repository and get your code and run the project. And right now, this repository is public, so I'm going to be able to get it without being added to the repository. Later, we're going to be doing some projects that we want to be private, and in order for me to see them, then I'm going to need to be added to the repository so that I can access them. But again, because this one is to be public, anybody can get to it. And so as long as I have this URL, I can get to this repository. So I'm going to copy that URL, and then that what gets submitted on Canvas. Couple of things before we're finished, some things that you might run into as you're doing the project that would kind of create some problems for you. First, if I delete this code, say clear selected's code, there is still a connection between this button and this code that's now missing. So if I take the clear button and I select it and then I hold the control key down and click on it, we'll see that it still has touch up inside being connected to clear selected, which is no longer there. And if we were to leave this here and run the application, it would crash. So I've got a couple of options. One is I could just break this connection by clicking this X. And so now clear is not connected to anything. Clear won't do anything, but you could tap it and it wouldn't attempt to call a non-existent function. So what I can do now is put this back, and I'm gonna, when I put this IB action back, I'm actually gonna make a mistake to illustrate another point. If I control click drag from here to here, and I'm anxious to create my IB action and I don't pay attention, and I leave this as an outlet, and as a name here I say clear selected, and I hit connect, and I go, oh man, I made a mistake. Yeah, I wanted an IB action, not an IB outlet. So I think, oh, okay, no big deal. I'm just going to delete this line of code. Well, I delete that line of code, but if I go back and control click here, we'll see that there is a referencing outlet on the view controller called clear selected. And again, this is going to cause problems because there's an Iboutlet that exists to clear, but the code associated with it has been deleted. So to get rid of this, not only do I have to delete the code, but I have to delete the connection. So I could click and get rid of that. So let me create the IB action correctly. So I'm going to control click drag from here to here. I'm going to change this to action, and I'm going to say clear selected, connect. Now this circle has a little dot in it, and when I move my mouse over it, it shows something popping up over here to show that these are connected. If I control click here, we see we do have that connection. Touch up inside goes to clear selected. I can also go up here to the view controller, control click, and I see clear selected is also connected to the clear button here. So let's say for a moment I were to control click here and I get rid of that connection. Now notice the circle has no dot in it, which means there is no connection between this code and the button, which means if I tap the button, this isn't going to get called. How could I connect the button back to this code? Well, I could put my mouse right in the circle and click drag to here and leave up. And now the circle is filled in, and when I control click, we see that they are connected again. I'm going to get rid of that one more time. So that's gone now. My circle is empty again. I could control click on clear, and I could select, I'm going to move this over a little bit, touch up inside, and I'm going to drag to here. And you notice I'm dragging to see what things will highlight. Going to the circle doesn't do anything, but going here and like dragging right over the IB action says connect the action. And when I leave up, there we are, touch up inside is connected to this. So remember that you can do it here, or you can do it on the object itself. This gets rid of it if it exists. Deleting code does not break the connection. So if you're going to delete code and you don't want that anymore, you may separately have to manually break the connection. So let's put our code back again, and it'll be info label.text equal quote quote. And I'm going to stop my simulator. I'm going to run my simulator again. I want to make sure that this works. Click hello, hello world, click clear, it goes away, click hello, hello world back again, clear works fine, rotate right, hello, clear, all works good, rotate left, and I hit stop on my simulator. Now notice my M's, my view controller and my storyboard have been modified by these actions that I took. So I'm going to go up and commit changes and say I fixed my IB actions in the view controller. And I'm also going to push this so it's on GitHub, committing the files and pushing it. And now GitHub is up to date, and we have a working project that we can submit.